Okay,
So
sounds good.
thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited to talk. So for those of you attending, Tyler and I have been talking, prepping for this for a couple weeks. Tyler shared a bunch of information about his background, and I think the thing that stood out to me the most when I was looking through it was just like the kind of winding path that led you to where you are today. So maybe you could talk about where your interest in programming started and how you kind of got on the path you're on, and then like what you're doing today. That'd be really a good way to, I think, set the stage.
Sure, yeah. So I definitely have sort of a unique background when it comes to software engineering. I wasn't a computer science major or anything like that. And I think that's starting to become pretty typical now. Like a lot of software engineers, have kind of these different backgrounds, which helps provide some good variety. But I originally started out as a psychology major, actually. I was pretty intent that I would finish up my undergrad, then go to grad school and get a master's or a doctorate and do counseling or clinical psychology or something of that sort. Anyway, so I was about 2 years into my undergraduate degree and got a little bit tired of it and realized that, I think people are really fascinating, but it's not necessarily something I would want to do for my job, right? To listen to problems and help try to solve them, right? Like that would be pretty emotionally draining, I would think. But I really enjoyed the hard science part of it. So like as part of the psychology degree, you would take classes like psychological statistics and just, how do you conduct studies and record data and analyze data. So I really enjoyed the hard science part of that. And so after having taken a couple of statistics classes, I ended up changing my major to statistics because I thought that was really fun. I mean, the whole field of statistics is just like making decisions in the faces of uncertainty, trying to find answers to problems. So it sounded pretty interesting. Like I like kind of the creativity side, the problem solving side of things. So I really enjoyed that for a while. And as I was doing that, kind of what drove me away from statistics a little bit is oftentimes like the statistics side is often I guess just analyzing things, and then you would build a presentation or a report or some sort of visual, right? But you weren't necessarily creating much. It was more just the analysis side of things. And so during that, like I had taken several stats programming courses. So statisticians use a lot of things like R or SAS or SQL just for managing data and working with that. And I really, really enjoyed that. R was probably my favorite class, and it was really cool that you could, write a program that would do a simulation that would, roll a 6-sided die 100 times, and then it could generate the report. Like something really simple. It was like, wow, like I wrote, 10 lines of code and it did this thing. So I really enjoyed that. And at the time I was working part-time as a product specialist at Qualtrics, essentially doing tech support for them. And so I was, kind of in the tech world a little bit, like obviously not coding at that time. But in solving some of these problems, like sometimes we'd have quick fixes that would be like, oh yeah, just use this little snippet of CSS or this little JavaScript snippet, and that could solve a problem for a customer. So I was kind of getting my feet wet just in like the web programming world. And then during that time I was, still in college. So I took a couple more courses of computer science courses. So I did like an intro to web programming. It's just like the main stack. So learning MongoDB, Express, it was AngularJS at the time, so 1.x and Node, and then just took like the intro like C++ course. But I really enjoyed those. And then anyway, at that point, I was probably midway through my junior year, and so if I were to switch to computer science, that would have added like another 3 years to my bachelor's. So I figured I didn't want to be in school for 6.5 years just to get my bachelor's. So I finished out the statistics. That's what I got my degree in. And beyond that, it's just been a lot of kind of self-directed learning. So I initially started doing just a ton of Code Academy courses, I was really involved in Free Code Camp. They have a lot of really good like certification courses and kind of build it yourself projects. Did a whole bunch of, Pluralsight courses, like HackerRank problems and exercises. Probably read like 20 textbooks that I would just find at the library of, JavaScript and stuff like that. Anyway, so that's kind of how I got into programming. As far as like, oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, during that process of self-teaching, were you ever discouraged?
Oh, totally.
Or yeah. So how do you handle that? I mean, like that's there's and then the other, the follow on to that is like, how did you know if you were on the right path to what you were trying to learn?
Yeah. So as far as like discouragement, like I think the first time it hit me of how little I knew was when I had started applying for programming jobs. So again, so I was working part-time in college at Qualtrics as a product specialist. And so after I had taken some of these programming courses and done some Free Code Camp stuff, I was like, yeah, like I know JavaScript. I can put together a simple web page. And so I started applying for these jobs, as just either a web developer or a software engineer. And one of the first ones came back and they said, your resume looks really promising, because I had listed like I know JavaScript and HTML and CSS and Ruby and Python and everything. Anyway, so I got through the first step and they sent me a coding exercise, and it was like, we want you to implement this authentication framework and stuff. And I just remember like staring at it. I was just like, I don't even know where to start with this. So that was like a huge blow to my confidence level, of like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing here.
Did you return your coding test to them?
No.
You didn't even return it.
Yeah, I had no idea where to start. Anyway, and so I mean that was a pretty big wake up call, like you can't land a job if all you know is how to write a for loop in JavaScript. Like that's not enough, right? And that's, I mean, I think it's probably what a lot of people run into as well, especially with being self-taught, is like, you start applying and realizing, especially now in just like the modern ecosystem of like, okay, now I have to understand Webpack and Babel, and I can't just know JavaScript. I have to know like a UI framework or library. So I have to know React or Angular or Vue. Like there's a ton of stuff. There's a pretty huge barrier to entry, it feels like. So anyway, that was, I get, if that helps answer your question, like
it totally does. And the reason I'm asking that question, and I'm sure we'll get to it, is like I'll be interested to know how that is reflected in what you write today, because I would imagine that has an impact on how you write and maybe your approach to what types of things to write about or how you write about those things.
Yeah. I mean, for the things I write about, like it definitely seems like I try to keep it, how to say this, I don't necessarily write for the beginner, right? Because I think there's already a lot of good resources out there, like, if you want to do Free Code Camp or Code Academy, or even just like a W3 schools, tutorial or something like that, like there's tons of good content out there already. So what I try to write about more, and I'm sure we can talk about this more later, but is more in-depth topics or just like new technologies I'm playing around with, things like that. But like what I don't want to do is just repeat the same JavaScript tutorial that you can find in 200 other places on the web, right? Like I don't think there's necessarily a lot of value in writing about something like that. Like I don't think I would have anything new to contribute.
Do you feel like throughout your process of learning all these things, well, I guess my first question would be, how did you eventually land a job as a developer?
Yeah. So I think I got lucky because I already had an in with Qualtrics as working as a product specialist. And so kind of at the same time that I was applying to other jobs and realizing like, hey, I can't quite cut it. I had an opportunity to work on like a web design team within Qualtrics. And so just as a brief background, if you don't know what Qualtrics is, they're right now they brand themselves as like an experience management company, but at its core, it was basically a survey technology company, just a software as a service. So we provide the platform that allows people to create surveys, and then other customers would buy licenses to Qualtrics so they could run their own research or customer feedback surveys or whatever. Anyway, and so the customers that are using these surveys, they want it to be branded with, their logo on the survey and their brand colors and stuff like that. So I was able to work on our design team, just creating like these custom branded surveys for clients. So like now you have this survey theme. So if you have a DZone survey, now you can, have it all branded and customized for you. So anyway, so that was a really good kind of initial start for me, because it was honestly like fairly simple HTML and CSS, so that was a really good in. And then after that, so at that point, I had graduated from college, got my degree in statistics, so looking for a full-time job. And I was offered a position on our professional services team at Qualtrics. So that was doing just like custom projects for clients. And so it wasn't like a full-blown, product software engineer, but it was rather just a lot of like these custom one-off projects for clients, which is actually really fun. Like, rather than working on the same thing for 3 months at a time, like a lot of these projects were only like, 1 to 2 weeks. So kind of got, a ton of different random experiences, random challenges to go through. Clients would say like, can you build X for me? And I would have to say, I don't know, but I'll try to figure it out, right? Like, we'll see. So anyways, that was my first like real software engineering job. I was working in professional services, and then I don't know how much you want to get into the rest of my career history,
did you continue down the path of learning? And the reason I'm asking all these is because I'm curious, as we talk about content in the developer space. I guess for my own interest, but hopefully for others here who might be writing content, like, did you ever experience a gap in that like self-training, that self-taught path, where like there wasn't quite the right content to help you get to that next step? Or was there always something you could find along the way?
Yeah. I guess to answer your question as far as like, was there always content out there? Like, I think I would say yes. I don't know that there's anything that I'd be working on that was so advanced that no one has ever thought of this before, right? And never written about it. And so a lot of it was just finding, I guess, the right content or finding good content, So like, for example, like I mentioned some of the earlier stuff I had done was like, Code Academy courses, and Code Academy was great just as far as like getting your feet wet into a programming language. But I felt like that didn't really provide like kind of the real world experience. You don't really like build any apps in Code Academy. I don't know if their curriculum has changed. This was 7 years ago, so I'm sure it's changed a whole bunch. Anyway,
mostly fundamentals, right? Like conceptual fundamentals, and right.
Exactly. And so then when it came to like actually building something, like, okay, I'm trying to build, an online signature question type where you can just click with your mouse and sign your name, right? Something similar to like a DocuSign type thing. It's like, okay, how would you actually do that? Like how do you attach the event listener? How do you use an HTML5 canvas? And so all of that, right? I mean, that's all Googleable. There's tons of stuff on W3 Schools and Stack Overflow. So yeah, it wasn't necessarily a challenge of content not being there. It's just trying to find the right content.
Right. And do you remember in that journey where you, other than Code Academy, where you would find, I mean, I'm assuming every piece of content you look for probably started with a Google search, would be my guess.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to like just trying to solve the problem at hand, like, yeah, I mean, it'd often be Google search, which would lead to some good Stack Overflow discussions.
Yeah.
But when it came to like the more intentional learning, of like, okay, I realize I have this gap in this area, I want to dig deep on that. Pluralsight was one of my favorites. They have like these different tracks that you can go through. So for instance, they would have like, probably 30 hours of JavaScript content going from like beginner to intermediate to expert or advanced. So that was really good just to like see someone coding, of like, okay, we're going to build this project together. That was
Yep.
really helpful. And then like Free Code Camp, I can't speak highly enough of them. I think really helped bridge the gap between just like the theory and the fundamentals and then actually developing something. Because a lot of things in their course curriculum is like you'd have these 5 capstone projects for every single one of their certifications, where you'd have to go build something. And they would give you these, user stories and product requirements of like, okay, it needs to do this, it needs to do this, it has to have this on the page, but they wouldn't give you any guidance whatsoever as far as like how to do it. And so it's actually very much like software engineering, right? Where we have these product requirements, but then it's up to you to figure out how do you actually solve those requirements and how do you implement it. So Code Academy was awesome. That was one of my favorite resources.
Awesome.
Or sorry, Free Code Camp, I should say. Free Code Camp.
Awesome. So then, as you get to a place where you're feeling, I think you mentioned in one of your posts something about, or no, it was in the notes you sent me about that imposter syndrome you had up front. Like, where in that journey did you feel comfortable enough with your skills that you could start writing about software development?
Yeah. So I mean, there's kind of 2 questions in that, right? Of like, where did I first start feeling more confident, like as a software engineer, and then finally, like as writing and being able to teach, right?
Yep.
So as far as just like feeling, yeah, like that imposter syndrome is going away. I think that probably happened in my second job. So that was over at Unique. They're an e-commerce cosmetics company. That was like really my first time working in more of a team environment as opposed to just like these solo, one-off projects. It's working in a team environment, a shared code base, doing Agile and Scrum and all that. And so with that, like that, I think gave me a lot of opportunities to teach and train, and because oftentimes we'd have these lunch and learn presentations, and it kind of just rotated through the engineers. We probably had maybe like 40 software engineers at the time, probably. So we would rotate through. So you'd give a few a year. And I remember preparing for one presentation, and I was just doing like just like array helper methods of like how would you write a reduce or filter or map or for each. And going through that and just thinking like, surely everyone already knows this content, like this is not helpful at all. Anyway, and then after like going through that and getting feedback, like it turns out a lot of people didn't know these things. And so it was actually helpful, right? And I think that was maybe my first realization that like, software engineering is a massive field and that I don't know everything, but neither does anyone else. Like,
Yeah.
we all have these different focuses, right? Like oftentimes we'll break down into, most commonly a front end or back end. Sometimes you pretend you're full stack, but even then you're still stronger in one area than the other generally. And so when you look at like the things that some people are really good at, like you have a lot to learn from them, right? But that's probably their area of expertise. And so then when it comes to like things that you're really good at, like they might know nothing about that at all, even though, they're a really experienced engineer. And so like, anyway, so
was that presentation your first hint that maybe creating content to help other people learn was something you wanted to do?
Yeah. I mean, from there, like I realized that I really liked teaching and training. So like at Unique, like I took the opportunity to do a lot of lunch and learns, do just like some brown bag workshop sessions. We did a lot just on like unit testing. We had one session on just like building HTML5 games. That was pretty fun. Just like a random fun topic. But yeah, I mean, that's probably a good turning point for where I realized I enjoyed teaching.
And so writing for you is a form of teaching, and I'm assuming you do other forms as well. I think I saw that. But what do you remember what the first thing is that you wrote and published publicly?
Yeah, first thing I wrote and published was, let's see, this was back in like January of 2020. But the first thing I wrote was all about this open source project that I had created. So I wrote this this library for JavaScript data structures and algorithms. And so it has like just some implementations of, how would you build a stack or a queue or a linked list in JavaScript. And then comes with like this interactive little playground built with storybooks. So I'm actually pretty proud of it. I think it's pretty cool. But I wrote about that, and not so much about that project, but just about all the tools that I learned about as I was building it. So like, just using tons of linters like StyleLint and Prettier and ESLint, and using build tools, so things like Rollup or Webpack, and then like just things for kind of the more like maintenance side of projects. So using things like Commitizin and Commitlint for like commit message linters and formatting, and then for publishing and using things like standard version, I think is what I had used. But anyway, so I started writing that just as like hey, here are all these cool tools that I've used and discovered and found really helpful. And here it is. We'll put it out there and see what people
Where'd
think.
you put it out there?
Medium was the first place I had written.
Cool. And
it got a decent response. Honestly, not a lot, as just, being a nobody, and this is the first thing I'd ever published online, right? Trying to pull through the stats right now. So it didn't get a whole lot. As of right now, it only has like 600 views, whereas like other ones have upwards of, like 30 or 40,000 views.
Sure.
So not a huge response, but I don't know that I was really expecting a big response at that point either. I think it was more just, let's get started writing. Let's make this
okay.
happen.
So you were setting out on that intentional path of just like writing frequently, and like I was curious because some people go through the experience of like they put something out there and then a bug bites them because they see that there's some sort of response to it, and they're like, oh gosh, I should be doing this more. But it sounds like you took the alternate route, which is like you wanted to just intentionally start writing and be consistent about it. Is that right?
Yeah. So it was sort of started on a whim. Like what I really wanted was to find a way to expand my influence. So like just going back to like the trainings that I'd give at work, like you can give a training to engineers at your company, depending on the company size. Maybe you're talking to 20 engineers or 50 or 100 or whatever, right? But it's a pretty limited audience, right? It's only the engineers at your company. And so to then be able to write an article which anyone can see, and which then, thousands or hundreds of thousands of people can read and benefit from, was a pretty big motivator to me. And so that was kind of the goal. And so, I'd set a goal for, I'm a big fan of New Year's resolutions, and I always have a few goals throughout the year. But one of my goals was I'm going to start writing. And so obviously, like, I didn't think like, oh yeah, 1 million people are going to read this first article. Like that wasn't the expectation at all. But the expectation, right, was to slowly start to publish content online and to expand my influence, that circle of influence. So that was kind of the goal.
And I think up to now, I think I saw you have something like 14 or 15 articles on DZone, but I'm assuming you've written more than that. What's that journey been like? Just like going from your first post to where you are now, in terms of like how frequently were you writing? Topically, were you focused on something, or were you kind of all over the place? How'd that go?
Right. Yeah. So I've been kind of all over the place as far as just like publishing platforms go. So
yep.
I started on Medium. After that, I wrote a couple things on Hacker Noon. I applied to be an author on Free Code Camp and got accepted into that. I heard about DZone from a friend, and he suggested I start writing there, which has been awesome because now here we are today. And I was writing on Dev as well. So I've been kind of all over the place, still trying to find a forever home of where to write.
Do you feel like there's like, do you like, a lot of people write for all of them, and is that kind of like how you see it panning out? Like, because I guess there's different audiences in different places, I would assume.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, I do cross post them so that they do end up on all the platforms. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a difference. Like, with DZone, it seems like you guys have a ton of readers. Like I think I was reading there's like a million members in DZone, right?
2 million.
And 2 million. All right, nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's been around for forever, right? Like I was looking through the little history on the about page, but it's been around since like the 90s, I thought, as a former version. Yeah. But I mean, like, anyway, so DZone's got an awesome audience. Like Dev definitely seems more focused towards the junior audience. They tend to comment a lot more, like it's more of like a forum-y type thing. Medium obviously is, not just tech focused, so there's a lot more non-programming content out there. But
so what have you found in using each of those platforms? What have, like, maybe without naming the platform, but like, what are the things you like or dislike about any given platform as a writer?
Yeah. So I really enjoy just like user engagement. So, anytime someone comments, right? So, I mean, it's nice, right, to see like, oh, you got 10,000 page views. Like, all right, there's a warm fuzzy. But it's even better when someone actually comments and is like, hey, this was really helpful. Thank you for that. Or, I have a question about this point. Can you clarify this? Because that kind of puts a name to it, right? They're not just a statistic at that point. You've got an actual conversation with an actual human being. So I really enjoy that. Yeah, I mean, that's probably the number one, is just engagement. So if you're looking for anything to boost or focus on, like anything you can do to focus or to help boost user engagement, like it's
particularly with like the conversations between authors and the readers. I think it seems to be a salient point. I would assume the other people listening in here probably feel the same way. How about when you're writing? Do you write in a tool on your desktop and then just import it into the different tools, or are there things about online editors you like? What are you using to actually write as your tool?
Yeah, so a lot of times I'll just write it in just like a Google Doc, and then at that point, as I'm going to, basically copy and paste into all the different platforms. So yeah, Google Doc is where most of that lives. I have just like a notes app, just like the, whatever the default standard Mac notes app is. That's where I jot down things like, just outlines or random ideas as I think of something like, oh, that would be interesting. But then, yeah, just as far as like actually putting them into the different platforms, like some of them handle it really well, some of them don't. Sometimes you paste in like a code block and it totally disappears or like loses the formatting, or you paste in an image and the image doesn't work. So it'd be awesome if you could just copy and paste and all the different platform editors worked the same, but there's always these minor differences between them.
There is, yeah, it's the online editor is a tricky thing, and it's not consistent across the web. I wish there was some like standard there across the whole web. That would be cool.
That's right. You can invent the new standard, which will now turn into 16 different standards.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned something which I think is interesting, because John Bester mentioned it when I was talking to him too, is this idea of like keeping a notepad where you jot your ideas. So like you have a list, I'm assuming somewhere, of kind of all the topics that you might write about, and you keep that as a living document.
Yeah, I do. So right now I've got probably, let's see, like 10 different ideas of things I'll be writing about in the future. And so, yeah, it's usually just maybe sometimes something interesting that I learned that week of like, yeah, I should write about that. Maybe just like an insight, sometimes even just a conversation that happened of like, we had this really good, opinionated discussion on best practices or something like that. So I'll jot that down and say like, yeah, that would be really interesting to write about.
And how do you, that kind of leads me into my broader question of like, how do you decide what you're going to write about? It's just those things, like you just kind of like, when it strikes you, the idea strikes you, like, or you have a conversation or whatever, that's how you decide? Or is there a method to the madness?
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's kind of some general themes, I think, in my writing. So like, I have to write about things that I'm passionate about. So, things that I really enjoy and things that I feel like I have some level of expertise around, right? So a lot of my articles focus on just like testing and the importance of it, about accessibility, just web accessibility, making sure that, it's usable for users of all sorts of abilities. JavaScript and React are two pretty common topics. So So just, yeah, kind of the world I live in, the things I'm passionate about. Another common theme is just like things I'm currently learning. So I'm not a GraphQL expert by any means, but I'm interested in it and I think it's cool. And so I play around with it a lot. So I've written a few on GraphQL and just some of the different like open source GraphQL projects, and then just like normal out of the box vanilla GraphQL.
And what's the angle you take when you're writing about something you're learning? Like, is it you're trying to expose kind of the experience you're having learning it, or is it just about things that you've observed, or what's the approach there?
Yeah, it's more like I guess, yeah, you could say my experience learning it, but not like explicitly about that. It's more like, hey, here's some of the cool things that I've come across as I've done that. So like one that I had written about recently was basically implementing a GraphQL layer on top of a REST API. So that was, kind of a question I had is okay, I'm working at, let's say I'm working at a company that, has been using REST for the last forever, and that's how all our API is, and we want to move over to GraphQL. Like, do we have to just cut over to it, or is there a way that we can, basically implement that side by side and kind of write a layer on top of it, and then eventually strip out the REST API underneath? So that was one thing I'd written about. So it was more kind of my exploring a technical problem and how could we possibly solve that.
That makes sense. I think that's probably, that is the domain of software engineering, is solving problems. So, and how do you decide if something like merits writing about versus just like talking about, or even like thinking about, like where do you draw the line of like, this is definitely something I should be writing about?
Yeah. In order for me to write about it, I want to feel like I have a decent grasp of the subject, right? So if it's just like, something cool I heard of and I spent 15 minutes Googling things, like I'm probably not going to write about that, right? Because I don't feel like I would really have anything valuable to contribute at that point, besides like, hey, I heard of this thing, it seems cool. Like, okay, that sounds like more like a tweet to me than an article. So yeah, it's typically something that I've spent a good amount of time actually exploring. And then at that point, it's like, okay, like, yeah, this would make a good article if we talked about this.
And once you do decide you're going to write something, walk me through your writing process.
Yeah. So I guess from the birth of it, right? So there's the Notes app I've talked about. So I've thought about something and jotted down an idea of, okay, we could write about this thing. After that, like when I'm actually sitting down to write the article, I'll usually start with an outline. So just, some main points of like, okay, here's my intro, here's my kind of the main points I want to do in the body, here's my conclusion. And so at that point, I've got a nice skeleton of the article. Like, I think sometimes if you just start writing, you don't really know where it's going to go. And maybe that's okay too, right? But the outline helps provides kind of some structure to it. And then after that, like if it involves some sort of demo app, like, or, some sort of proof of concept type thing, I'll go ahead and build that. And then at that point, I'll go write the article. And from there, like it pretty much writes itself, like I already know the main talking points. Now that I've built the app, I probably have some interesting anecdotes of like, here's a problem I ran into, or this was something that was really cool that I found. And so actually like having the app and the demo app there to begin with really makes the rest of the process pretty easy. From there, it's just, putting the words to it and going through and proofreading a few times, and then we're good.
Well, how about for the more like opinion focused pieces that you write? Those seem a little more like off the cuff, almost like like a trainer, like you're walking through like your stream of consciousness around a topic.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Those are definitely more freeform. Even for those, like I'll probably jot down some talking points, maybe not like a full-blown outline, but some ideas. So like, I'd written that one of like how to be a terrible project maintainer.
Yep.
And that was more just like thoughts of like, okay, what are things that really bother me when I try to contribute to a repo? Like what makes this a poor experience for a developer? So I'd jot down probably 5 or 6 things, and then just start writing about it. So you're right; those are probably a little more off the cuff, a little more stream of consciousness.
And how is there a different type of, well, I don't know what kind of reception you get on your articles, what you consider, like you talked about user engagement and stuff. So I would assume that's kind of how you measure the reception of an article versus the page views. But do you find that certain types of content do better than others?
Yeah. Again, it definitely kind of depends on the platform. Some are more geared towards junior developers, so like more basic topics go there, or do better there.
Sure.
Some platforms are more geared towards like the really in-depth technical deep dives and the how-to tutorials, like do well because they're there to learn something new. And then like the opinion pieces are always fun too, because they're an opinion, and so by definition it can be debated, so those often spark the most comments, get some good back and forth, sometimes some very heated people who disagree deeply with what I've written.
I think that's that I wonder if there's almost like a like a positive feedback loop there for you, like because you like the user engagement, and if you're going to write those, people are going to engage with them.
Yeah,
does that make you want to write more of those?
It's a dangerous line to walk down, because you don't want to be just like an internet troll, right? And you don't want to write clickbaity things. But if I'm being honest, it gives you a little high to kind of get a rise out of someone, but that's not necessarily something that I'm seeking for, right? Like the intent is not, let's see how many people we can bug enough to write a comment about this.
Sure. No, I mean, I think from reading your articles, it seems like more you're just writing about your perspective. Like it's not something that's like a fire starter. It's to like almost like passively aggressively like break down a subject so that in a way that I think a lot of people probably agree with. And how often are you writing these days?
Yeah.
Like how do you find the time to write,
Yeah. That's honestly something I'm trying to scale back a tiny bit. A lot of times I'll end up writing, just at nights. So, maybe 1 or 2 nights a week, I'll spend a couple hours writing. And so, like as far as like, just my publishing cadence and frequency, like I used to write something like once a week. And that ended up taking up a lot of my time, which, you want to have a life outside of work. Like I don't think everyone should just code all day and then just code more in their free time or write about it or whatever, right? Like you want to pursue other hobbies too. So at this point, like I'm usually writing probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 articles per month, it seems like. But before, it was like 4 to 6 per month.
And since you started your writing journey in 2020, the beginning of 2020, what would you, if you had to like distill it down to like some key takeaways that things you've learned along the way on your writing journey that you would want to share with others, what are those things?
Yeah. So a few things, and we've kind of hit on a couple of these already, but the first is probably just write about what what you're passionate about. I think if you're trying to sound, smarter than you are, or like more than you do about a certain subject, like that will likely show through, unless you're just a really good writer or a really good liar. So find something you're passionate about and write about it. And that, I mean, I think it's kind of important as a second point too, is like I try to write for myself rather than for a specific audience, so like kind of talking about writing a more general thing. I had a really interesting conversation with Quincy Larson, actually, from he's the founder of Free Code Camp. But he was telling me a lot about Free Code Camp's mission and how they're trying to make it more accessible for people to break into the field of coding. And he was talking about this pyramid of kind of like a pyramid of relevant audience or readers. And so it's like, okay, so if we have 7 or 8 billion people in the world, let's say like 2 billion of them use computers, right? They're not programmers, but they use computers, right? So they might email or use Microsoft Word or whatever. And so if you were to write an article about how to do something like that, of like, this tip in Microsoft Word or something, like you have this massive audience because a ton of people are using computers. So then if you scale down kind of to this funnel, this inverted pyramid, then you have, like programmers or people trying to break into the programming field. So you have millions of people there. And then even more funneled down, you have people who are programmers. Even funneled down, you have people who are very experienced. Then even funneled down, you have like CTOs. And so the level that you're writing to kind of determines like your potential audience. And so what he was telling me is basically that, like, okay, so if you could write an article about a JavaScript for loop, for example, you have a massive, massive user base, right, of people who would want to read it, which I agree with. That's true. If you write the fundamentals, there are a lot more people who would benefit from that. But at the same time, just from like a personal standpoint, like that's not exciting to me. Like I don't want to write an article about a for loop, And so at that point, like I think, basically just accepted like, yeah, some of these might be more of like a niche audience that would have a smaller reader base, but that's okay because it's something that I'm excited about and interested in. So sorry, that was a really long-winded answer, but right what you're interested in.
No, I think it's a good story, and I think it probably is something. It's a good anecdote because I think it's something a lot of people have to think about when they're writing. Is like, who are you writing for? And if it's for you, that's okay. If it's for a specific audience, I think that should set maybe the expectations of, how many people are going to read it or how many people are going to engage with it. Usually that has a lot to factor in, like the topic and the breadth of the topic. Also, I mean, one thing I think about too is like if you're going to write something on JavaScript loops, there's a lot of competition in writing about that too. So it's like you're fighting for a bigger pie, but you're going to get a lot smaller slice of the pie in terms of attention. So I think there's some sweet spot in there too.
Totally.
But especially if it's something that you're passionate about.
Yeah. And then just like as far as other things like tips for new writers, like probably just a couple others. Like if you want to start writing, like just do it, make it a goal and go write something. Like, kind of like what I was saying before, like I wasn't really banking on a huge reception from the first article, and I was right, I didn't get one, right? So just keep writing if that's something that you want to get good at or want to pursue. It takes time to build up kind of a reader base and people who actually care about what you have to say. And then just one other, this is probably more of just like a personal pet peeve, but one thing I try to do is when I write tutorials is that I'll post a link to a GitHub repo and a working demo of the code, because now, no matter where you are and following through this tutorial, you have a working end result that you can reference. Sometimes I'll be going through something and like, trying to learn something new or working through a tutorial and it's not working on my machine. And like, ultimately then what it comes down to after me trying to figure it out for a long time is like, okay, well, they didn't explain this one step, like they had this assumption that you already had this piece of configuration set up, but they never told you to. And so you're basically working through these code snippets that are pasted in the article, but you don't have the full picture and you don't have the full GitHub repo. So then you're just stuck wondering like, did I screw something up or is something missing? So anyway, if you're writing technical articles, so if you're writing technical articles, I'd highly recommend posting a full working example as well.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. I think it's easy to make assumptions too when you're writing about technology and programming. Like you said, like you assumed when you were teaching your colleagues about JavaScript methods. It's like maybe they don't know. You assume they do, but there's a whole swath of people that don't. So I love that advice. I think that's super helpful. And most people learn. I feel like most programmers learn by doing. So having access to the code itself is is awesome.
Definitely.
And I guess I did want to leave a few minutes for some questions. I also wanted to say congrats. I saw you cross the 100,000 page view threshold on DZone not too long ago, maybe a few days ago.
Thanks. Yeah.
So that's a big milestone. I think it just, like you talked about having 600 views on your first article, and you just passed 100,000. So I mean, obviously something's working, and probably the consistency is important. But yeah, just want to say congrats, and I think that just shows that sticking with it and writing about what you're passionate about is effective, and it gets people wanting to read it. So let's open the floor for some questions. We have a bunch of people in here. Presumably most people in here are core members, and they are people who are also writing. So I think it's a good chance to talk to ask some questions of someone else doing the same stuff.
Sure.
And I'm going to move so that I can plug my computer in. Ali Reza, you got a question?
Well, yeah, first of all, I really enjoyed the conversation. It's nice to have you in our community. Yeah, I think the first time I read your article about how to be a terrible project maintainer, it was awesome, to be honest, because I don't know if you had a chance to see any of my articles, and I'm also looking to this side of the IT companies, because I think that's a really interesting part to spend time. And I was just thinking during the interview, what can I say to you? And I was just thinking, because of your great background in the psychology, it's maybe something really we are missing also in our side. I mean, the human part. And I see that you have this article, also another article to give advice to the junior developers. I think we are facing with a lot of frustration every day, with a lot of conflicts between the people. And unfortunately, in the other side, there are some people just in a really positive way say, okay, this is the agile way, this is the DevOps way, and you have to do it and you will be successful. But in the real life, not many companies can do that, and not everyone is successful, and they don't know why. Because literally we cannot create a one formula for everyone. And this is, I think, one of the most difficult part of the IT companies, because the things we are actually reading in the books are not the things we are for certain think that it's really practiced and did research by in a scientific way. And there are proof that, okay, this way of working could help maybe majority of the people. We don't know, actually. And this is something recently I start to think about, that, okay, in every event, people talk about the new way of working, but we never ask, okay, what is the proof that it can actually work for most of the people? So, well, yeah, what I was going to ask you, it's, yeah, I would suggest, because of your nice style to say this and the way you look at it, I think it's nice if you have some ideas about this part, because I agree with you regarding the programming. There are a lot of articles in the internet, and there are people are doing that very good. But I think this side of the IT companies, I mean, the job of the developers, is quite important, because usually I don't see that there are so many articles, or there are people that at least spending time on that. I don't say they don't see it, but I'm just saying that we need to also put some light on that. Sorry if I talk too much.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, a lot of problems that I've seen, just obviously at every company you work at, there are things you like and things you don't like, and oftentimes the problems are more like organizational than technical, right? Of how do people work together, or even things, yeah, like you were saying, like maybe for instance, like code reviews, like how do you effectively give people good feedback in a constructive way, or how do you take that feedback, without being defensive? So yeah, I mean, there's, I think, a lot of good soft skills, and maybe the psychology side of software engineering that, yeah, maybe we could emphasize more.
Yeah, I think that's I've seen both of you guys writing on those topics, and I think it's super important to continue to explore those. And I'm glad we get to cover that on DZone, and people get to read about that stuff on DZone. Thank you, Ali Reza.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Does anybody else have a question they want to ask, or a talking point, or something they'd like to share with Tyler? Bartek's joined us the whole time up here. He's got to have a question or a thought.
No, nothing particular for now. Nice to hear that somebody is ready to share his thoughts about writing and their mental process of writing.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to do many more of these, and it's been interesting for me to learn from each of you what your process is like and what you like and don't like about the different tools. And it's super interesting because everyone has a little bit of a different process. I'm sure everyone here that's listening has a different process, but there's some common themes, which I think Tyler probably hit on. It reminds me a lot of stand-up comedians in a way. Like, stand-up comedians write down their ideas in like a notepad, and then they formulate them into jokes later on. It's like, it feels like the same process to me. I don't know.
That's next in my career path. Do
Yeah.
some stand-up comedy.
You're doing written comedy, I think, at some level already. Do you still wish you never learned to code?
Oof, no. If you've read through the end of that one's a more of a satire piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are definitely some quirks that have changed me as a person through software engineering, but I still appreciate the creative side of it, and I probably wouldn't change that. So I still do enjoy coding.
That's good. Okay, well, if we don't have any more questions, I really want to open it up. No one on the DZone side?
There's one in the chat.
No, I think all questions are
Oh, I
answered.
can't see the chat. Okay, let me see. Let me pull the chat up here. Or if you can read it.
Here, I'll
Thank you,
Hayata
Samantha.
asked, what would DZone need to do to make you write exclusively on DZone?
Pay a lot of money, of course.
Yeah. That's a good question. Money, okay. I really don't know. Like, again, like I really enjoy the user engagement is really motivating for me. So I mean, again, like, you already do have some good user engagement, but anything you can do to boost that would be awesome. I know some platforms are starting to do, like, basically like simple payment programs. Like, it's not a lot of money, but it's pretty small, right? So based off of like the readership,
Yep.
Some people use like the web monetization or something, but that would be neat to see. Again, I don't really expect that would come to a whole bunch anyway, so that might not even be worth pursuing anyway. But I don't know, just keep making it a great place, keep driving the user engagement. It's probably my biggest thing.
Awesome. Yeah, those are things that we are constantly talking about. Particularly, I think one thing you guys probably are all in tune with is this. I think there's a huge dialogue happening in the industry around making it worthwhile for creators to create content and how you motivate them to do that. And, a lot of people feel like they want to get off the big platforms that don't provide any value back to them. They're really just taking. And I think that's a really big challenge for the entire industry. So I think you hit on that quite nicely, and something we have to think about a lot too. But those are great pieces of advice, and we will obviously continue to work on those things. Love the user engagement piece too. I think the more we can foster conversation around these things, the better. Okay, well, we're running right up on time. This has been super insightful, and it's just been great to kind of get to know you and what motivates you and your process and how you got to where you are. And I hope that some of the people attending felt like they got something out of this and they could learn a thing or two, or at least find something relatable. And we'll obviously continue to do these. I'm finding them fascinating. Tyler, is super fascinating just to hear your story. And then as always, it's like the stuff you're writing on is awesome. You should keep doing that for sure.
Thank you.
And the rest of you, thanks for attending, and thanks for your conversation and questions. And we will get this up online for other people to watch shortly. So thanks again. Tyler, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.